I mean, so you did rubber hand illusions and that kind of stuff in Nottingham, right? But
Yeah,
or like,
sort of.
so how did you get into that? Because it seems to me like it's a somewhat smaller area.
Yeah, so I guess I came to the end of my undergraduate degree, and I during my degree I always wanted to do. I was thinking I'd go into kind of clinical, as lots of psychology students do, and then I remember in the final year of my course I did a module which is on neuropsychology, and I was just like, oh, I just want to keep learning about it. How do I do this? What kind of job? So I went to see one of my lecturers, and I said, I don't know what to do, but I want to keep learning about this. What are my next steps? Like, I could do a master's, and they suggested, well, why don't you apply for a PhD? You never know, you could get on. So I looked up different. At the time, I was interested in kind of stroke and that kind of thing. So, and then I found, well, actually, it was Steve Jackson rather than Roger Newport, who was my second supervisor at Nottingham. Roger Newport was my first supervisor in the end, and their research seemed interesting. And so I applied for a PhD, and I got on. And then I guess Roger was interested in, they were looking more at motor control, so he was interested in motor control. That's what he did for his PhD and was doing on. And then he was interested in, when I was starting a project to do with awareness of action, so awareness of your body, and like that whole kind of self consciousness and stuff really interested me. So that's kind of where we started, and so awareness of action. And then we kind of at the same sort of time, there were people like Patrick Haggard, as well as Steve Jackson, who's the professor in that lab, had got funding from EPS, the Experimental Psychology Society, to run a series of sort of small meetings with a theme of body representation. And so right from the beginning of my PhD, I went along to these. They were really small at the time. They were like...
So what year was this? Because, I mean, the rubber hand illusion is 1998, right? So
it
can't have been that much after, or, I mean, somewhat.
2004, I started my PhD. So not that much after. So it was a developing field, basically. It wasn't, now it's quite popular, although...
Exactly, that's what I mean. Like
at the time it wasn't. And these meetings, these body representation meetings had 15 to 30 people in them, like quite small. And I do remember Henrik Ehrsson as a postdoc at one of these meetings. So, I didn't speak to him then or anything, but, eventually I went on to work with him. But see, they were really tiny little meetings, and then they just grew and grew throughout the course of my PhD. So I think it's just timing, I guess. I just joined this lab just as this that was interested in this area, just as it was kind of blossoming, and that's how I learned about the rubber hand illusion and stuff. I have to admit that when I first learned about the rubber hand illusion, before I ever experienced it myself, I was a bit skeptical of this, like illusion making you feel like your hand's your own. But then after I experienced the illusion, then I was convinced, because I have a really strong illusion. I was like, oh my gosh, it does actually really work. It does actually really feel like it's my hand. So that's my...
Could you briefly explain what the rubber hand illusion is?
Oh yes, of course. So it is an illusion where you get people to feel like a fake hand is their own, and you do this by you use a fake hand or a rubber hand, hence the name rubber hand illusion, and you place it on the sort of the table in front of a participant, so it sort of looks like it's coming from their own body. And then you normally use something like a hairdresser's cape that kind of hides the fact that that it's has the hand finishes at the wrist, sort of thing. So it hides the wrist of the fake hand, and also your forearm. And then the participant's forearm is put somewhere else, either sort of next to it and hidden with a screen, or perhaps underneath it. Often you can use that. And so under the table or underneath a platform on which the rubber hand is on. So basically you can't see your own hand. You can only see this fake rubber hand as if it's coming out of your body. And then what happens is the experimenter normally uses brushes to like brush or in some way touch your real hand and the fake hand at exactly the same time and exactly the same place. And then because what you see, a hand being brushed, matches what you feel, your hand being brushed, your brain sort of interprets that as the fake hand is your hand. So it kind of recalibrates the felt position of your hand, which we call proprioception, in line with that of the rubber hand. So it feels like your hand has moved to the position of the fake hand, and it feels like the rubber hand is your hand. But where if you did the stroking at different times, so it wasn't exactly the same time and exactly the same place, so it's asynchronous, then you don't get the illusion to the same extent. Is that clear?
I think so. I mean,
Okay.
it's always hard, same for me. Like, I don't know it as well as you, but I've done it a few times, and
Yeah.
I think that's clear. But actually, one question is so I've only done it or had it done on me when the hand was next to my hand. I've never done the underneath or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do they work differently well, or what's why would you do one or the other?
So I think, well, often it's I don't know, a case of logistics. You might have, like in the scanner or something, if you're in the brain scanner, it's much easier. You don't have the lateral space to have the hand next to it, so you put the hand underneath. I mean, and I'm not sure if there's been a study, I can't think off the top of my head, which directly compares the two. But in my experience, the one where it's actually underneath is much stronger. But the original design was to the side. But if you imagine, if you're thinking about the felt position of the hand, it's when you've got it one above the other, it's kind of, they're overlaid, even though there is obviously this height difference. So I think that's why, it's because it seems to be more, and also the how your the posture of the shoulder and stuff is more in line with that position of the hand. So I can't think of a paper that's directly looked at this, but my experience is that one is stronger. So it also just takes up less space. So some of the studies I've been doing over recent years are I've been doing sort of in public engagement events like science festivals and stuff with kids, and it's just easier to have a little platform. It's just logistically easier, I think, to use the one above the other method. But the traditional one, that Botvinnik and Cohen used the first ones were done in that way, so that's probably why.
So you said you had a really strong illusion, and
Yeah.
I think maybe one reason why I find the research really interesting, but maybe one reason why I'm not that much into it is because I get a very weak illusion after lots of effort.
Okay.
So if I remember correctly, when I was at Karolinska, I think I asked this question, and if I remember correctly, there wasn't really a good explanation for why it works for some people, not for others. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, so we don't really know exactly what we do know. There is a massive variation in, like, most people get an illusion to some degree. Some people get no illusion, and again, it's like, then they just think I'm a crazy lady stroking their hands, right? But it's fine. I've literally given like thousands of these illusions, so I'm happy with all different kinds of responses. But I think it depends on so it might be the way. There's several theories about why the illusions work and how they work, and so it might be the way that your brain kind of weights different information. So perhaps for some reason you weight this kind of the felt position of the limb, what we call proprioception, stronger relative. I mean, we're all visually dominant, but you might, relatively speaking to other people, kind of weight that information as a bit stronger. Also, I think there's, with recent theories of this kind of weighting of different information, is you might experience the illusion if we keep giving you enough information to suggest the hand is your hand. So where from Nottingham, when I was in Nottingham, we didn't use the rubber hand illusion in the traditional way that I've described. Instead, we had something called the Mirage system, which created similar illusions, but using sort of real-time video feedback of your actual hand. So it was a much more kind of immersive and realistic, and that we found it had much more higher rates of people experiencing strong illusions, because it was actually your hand. But then we did really cool things like stretching fingers and moving your hand into different places, and these were making hands disappear or feel like they disappear. So maybe you would have a stronger illusion in that context. But for me, it doesn't really matter. It can be like I've done, and this is from a non-published study, but I've done illusions using a monkey hand, and I get the illusion with a monkey hand. I don't know what it says about me, but yeah.
Yeah, isn't it? I mean, if I remember correctly, so I think isn't it that basically, like, for example, like skin color or something makes no difference usually. I think like if it has to look like it has to have fingers basically or something like that, right? Like a block of wood doesn't do it.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
then it has to like have, I don't know, like, yeah, 5 fingers or something like that.
Yeah,
Or...
so, well, there's individual differences across this. So there's studies to show that you can get illusions, you can get a significant effect of the illusion when the skin color is not your own skin color. But to say it doesn't make any difference, I think, is not accurate. So we've talked so far, when I've described the rubber hand illusion, I've talked about the synchrony of touch being really important. But there's obviously another aspect, and that is your high level knowledge of what your body looks like. And so that's, or I think it's been termed like your body's structural description or something like that. And so these kind of high level constraints have an impact on the strength of the illusion. So whereas you can still get illusions, you can still get a significant effect with a different skin color hand, but if you look at the data, it tends to be not quite as strong when it doesn't match your own body. There's been some really interesting illusions which have tried to explore, and actually I'm writing a paper at the moment using the monkey hand illusion, trying to explore the role of these top-down constraints, these kind of what you know of what your body should look like, limitations on the illusion. So, and I've looked at it in children. It's an unpublished study yet, but and I'm in the process of writing it up. But we found that this kind of develops during adulthood, but also in adults with the monkey illusion, that it's kind of related to their fantasy proneness, so how much they are willing to sort of suspend disbelief in general. So if that makes sense. So this is kind of these high level constraints, but you can give invisible hand illusions. So that you may have experienced that in Henrik's lab, where there was no fake hand, they just stroked empty space, and you feel like you've got an invisible hand.
Yeah, I think Arvid might have tried that. I don't know. I think we took like 2 minutes to get the normal rubber hand to work.
Oh yeah, okay.
So I think then we basically said like, yeah, invisible one is going to be a bit hard now.
Yeah, well, whereas I had spent ages kind of in heated discussions in our lab meetings about like what does it mean? How can you have this invisible hand illusion? How does it work? It doesn't really make sense. What are you embodying? And then they were like, okay, you have a go. And I was like, within a couple of seconds, like, oh, it really works. It really works.
So invisible hand works. That means like you just don't have the rubber hand, right? You just pretend.
Yeah. You feel like your hand is sort of, you sort of stroke an empty space, and it feels like you own an invisible hand. So your hand is there, but you can't see it, basically. And it feels like your hand's gone invisible. It's kind of a really weird experience. So, and I published a study last year where we did a version of that where I was able to do invisible finger stretching. So our tactile feedback, instead of like kind of the brush strokes, is we stroked along the finger, and then gradually your sort of invisible finger got longer and longer, if that made sense.
Oh, you mean like the stroke you saw kind of?
Yes, it stretched longer and longer, whilst we're keeping kind of the same length on your finger, and people felt like they were getting these long invisible fingers. The strength of the illusion isn't as strong, obviously, as if you had real visual feedback, but we were able to elicit that kind of that feeling of long invisible fingers, which is exciting. So interesting.
It's such a bizarre research area. Like even within like psychology or doing experiments or something, I give people make a decision between like 2 things or something, and then you have these things where you give like that's the one thing that I found so cool in when I was in Stockholm, is that this was pretty much the only time that consistently participants said it was an interesting experiment to take part in. I mean, here you occasionally have someone who said, "Oh, that was really cool," and you go like, "Was it? Like, really? That was interesting?" I mean, fair enough, but we did the full body illusion, but there it was fairly common that people would say like that was actually really interesting.
Yeah, it's nice because what's really nice in science to try and get people to engage in it, and that's why this field is really good for that, because people can take part. Like that's why I do a lot of these public engagement events, and so you get people to take part, and then they get interested in why it works and how it works. Although a lot of people sort of say, oh yeah, but what's the point? And then you're like, aha, and then you can give them the proper science behind it, and they're like, oh yeah, so it's not only fun, but it's also important. So yeah,
best of both worlds.
Exactly, I think so. But yeah, sometimes they think that I'm a bit like, I have like fake, my lab has got, open the cupboard in my lab and there's a mannequin in there and stuff. And so people do think I'm a bit weird. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, she's the lady with all the hands. So, but
Yeah, it's especially weird when I think someone said that in Henrik's lab that they were going through Stockholm with like a rubber hand in their bag or something, and you do sometimes get slightly weird looks where there's like a finger coming out of your bag or something.
Yeah, what have you got there? Yeah, absolutely.
So you said like you kind of accidentally almost got into the field.
Mm-hmm.
How did you end up then in Henrik's lab in Stockholm? I guess you said you met him earlier, but didn't talk to him.
Well, yeah.
Not avoiding him, but just didn't talk to him.
Yeah, well, I mean, I met him when he was a postdoc, but then I met him later as well, but I didn't really speak to him very much. I'm quite shy, especially when I was a PhD student. I was very shy about, so I wasn't very good at that. But yeah, so during the course of my PhD, and then I stayed on in the same lab and did 2 short postdocs. They were about a year. And then I was looking for a job, and someone sent me an advert for a job in Henrik's lab. And obviously Henrik at that point was blossomed into a very well respected researcher in our field, like with some excellent publications and some really nice big grants. So I was like, oh, I'd like to try and work with him. So I applied, and I got invited for interview. And when I turned up, he recognized me, even though we hadn't, and was like, oh yeah, so we do know each other. We'd seen each other at conferences. And it went from there, really. I mean, Henrik has such a great reputation. So obviously when the opportunity came to work with him, I was very keen to take that. And I wanted to learn fMRI, and I hadn't been able to do that during my PhD. So it was a good opportunity as a postdoc to learn fMRI.
Was that a problem that you had you done like some sort of neuroimaging before, or was it really? I'm always curious, like I'm still in the middle of my PhD, but I'm always curious like how easy it is to get a postdoc if you don't have the tools that you want to use later on. I mean, to some extent you have to learn new stuff, but
Yeah, so actually it probably is really difficult. It's good to learn these skills in your PhD if you can, because it is really difficult to get a postdoc which is on neuroimaging without that neuroimaging experience. The benefit with Henrik's lab is that he doesn't just do neuroimaging, so he does behavioural. So he has met plenty of people who work for him who don't really do neuroimaging, but just focus on that behavioural work. So it's not just a neuroscientist or a psychologist, but bringing those two together, which I think is really important to have the skills in both, because you get psychologists that maybe don't do so good neuroscience, and neuroscience that don't necessarily do so good, that sounds bad, psychology, but you know what I mean? It's kind of nice to have the expertise in both and try to join that. I don't necessarily class myself as that. I don't think I'm an expert in neuroimaging, but at least I kind of know what I'm doing a bit now. So that helps.
That's good.
So yeah, it was a rare opportunity as a postdoc to be able to learn that, and also in one of the top labs in my field. I was really lucky to get that position. So it was good. And Stockholm, lovely city. Enjoyed living there for 4 years.
Yeah, it's also, I mean, I really loved it, but I was there for one summer when they had the nicest weather ever. So I think I have a very biased view.
But the winters are also nice with the snow and I don't know, I liked the way it changed over the year. So I like that. But the summers were always, after a long cold winter, the summers were always welcome, even if it wasn't perfect weather. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's what really surprised me when I came in, like people seemed so happy to see the sun.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's not like I grew up in, I still grew up in Northern Europe, so I'm used to having like cold winters and everything, but that still surprises me how much people just stood outside and just like, sunshine.
Yeah, I think others in the lab that came from like Southern Europe or California, somewhere in the States that's really sunny, struggled a lot more with the climate in Stockholm. But I was fine. I was fine with it. Obviously, it's colder and darker than the UK, but I didn't notice that much difference, to be honest. So that was fine.
Actually, the thing I probably wanted to talk most about, I guess, is your work on, I guess, for using full body illusions to study eating disorders and what do you call it, body satisfaction, or these kind of things. Is that what you're kind of focusing on right now, or?
I've developed a bit from there. So I still dabble a bit. I guess the problem is it's what I would like to do is work more with eating disorder patients, but I found there's, it's difficult to engage with those kind of populations. I think particularly in the UK when I've talked to different researchers in different places. So, and I guess when you think about it, so some of my studies, what we did is the full body illusion. It's basically like the rubber hand illusion, but for the full body. So you wear a virtual reality headset and you look down as if looking at your own body. But instead of seeing yourself, you see images from a camera of another person's body or a mannequin body from this first person perspective. So if in the place of your own body, you see this different body. And then again, this touching at the same time helps strengthen that illusion. And what I've done before is give people ownership over fatter bodies and slimmer bodies. And I suppose, no one's going to let me into an eating disorder clinic and just give these eating disorder patients ownership over obese bodies, because that's ethically could be quite challenging. But
why exactly?
Well, it's a transient experience, but so it doesn't last very long. But it could be that it might cause anxiety if they look down and see their body as obese.
Right, like thinking they should get even slimmer, or
yeah, exactly, or they might find it emotionally difficult. So we don't really know because no one's let me do it yet. So, but yeah, what I found when I've looked in the healthy population is that when you give women ownership over an obese body, actually with men, as we found it as well, then people felt worse about themselves because they kind of owned that body and they felt fatter. And they felt worse about themselves, like lower body satisfaction. And this was also related to when we can measure sort of individual differences on the sort of eating disorder, psychopathology, one might call it, or just sort of how their negative feelings towards themselves and eating behaviours anyway, that's sort of related to. So the lower body satisfaction they have in the first place meant the stronger effect they had when they owned this obese body. The worse the more negative they felt after owning that obese body. Did that make sense? So so that's what we found, that we can change their emotional experience by changing how they perceive their body shape and size, basically. And when we did that in the brain scanner, and we found that the areas of the brain that are linked to this perceptual experience of the body, so the experience of size and shape of your own body, were actually directly linked or communicating with these more emotional regions of the body. So it seems to be there's like a direct relationship in the brain between the perception and the emotion, which I think is quite interesting, especially when there are theories around eating disorders which suggests that they have inaccurate perception of their body. And so this kind of inaccurate perception might be in some way partly driving their emotional response, but we don't really know that yet. It's just a theory.
Yeah. And that's just is the main problem with testing clinical populations, then the ethical part, or is it also like organization, or
well, there's lots of logistical issues So there's ethics. There's also sort of, it's nice to get clinicians engaged, but a lot of clinicians are so overworked that they don't really have time to engage in research, even if they want to. So that's, there's lots of different issues, which meant that this area of research has been a bit slower than I would like. But but we've still looked at it within healthy populations, and we can see, and then that tells us a little bit about risk factors for developing eating disorders, perhaps, rather than looking at clinical populations. So I was able to do some rubber hand illusion stuff with some eating disorder patients, but that's as far as I've got. And then that clinic was taken over by a different organisation, and I went on maternity leave, so I need to try and, I've not long come back, so I need to try and re-engage with the clinicians there to see where we go from there. So
right. Yeah, that does always seem with clinical stuff that it just involves, how should we say, just a lot of organizational time, talking to people, getting them to trust you or wanting to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also doing a bit of work now with looking at perception of the body during pregnancy, because obviously I hadn't thought about it before, and then I got pregnant and I was like, oh yeah, why didn't I look at pregnancy before? And so again, I'm looking at the same sort of aspects, so this link between bodily changes and emotional aspects, because again, a lot of people, there's in the perinatal period, so pregnancy and after birth, there's high instance of anxiety and depression in this group of people. So it's interesting to look at how the body is related to that. So in terms of, you have lots of external changes, but also internal changes, what we'd call interoception and hormonal changes. So I'm kind of interested in that, and I'm currently working with a midwife, and I'm hoping that will lead to something. But again, there's a lot of the work behind that is trying to engage with clinicians and make good links and get people enthusiastic about your work, and often in academia we're quite interested in underlying mechanisms and the basic science behind things, but obviously in clinical practice they're mostly interested in the applied elements. So you really want to bring those things together, but it's quite a learning curve to see how to try and link the two to keep everyone happy, because if I talk too much about the mechanisms, they're like over my head, what's the importance of that? And you have to try and keep those engaged, and then also embrace the applied stuff, but that's not necessarily always as controlled as you would do in the lab. So yeah, it's quite a learning curve for me, but it's interesting, and I think it's really important, because often with all the best intentions of researchers, the clinic and the lab don't often talk so well. So trying to do that, it's a long process, but it's kind of the reasons that got me into research in the first place. So I'm trying to continue that and to make those clinical links.
So what is then the what can these body illusions, I mean, you mentioned earlier, for example, in these public not discourses, but when people ask you like, okay, this is fun, but what's the point of this? So like, for example, for the clinical context, what exactly, I mean, maybe not now, but in principle, what can these kind of bodily illusions add to help, I guess, clinicians do their work better?
Yeah, so, well, I think some people have done work with full body illusions in eating disorder patients. And they have suggested that patients have, how they probably phrase it, a less stable body representation. So they tend to get the illusions far stronger, and maybe it's less important of this synchrony of touch, which is obviously, as I've said before, is really important for most people, for the strength of the illusion, that perhaps it's a little less important for them, so more readily adapt to these bodily changes. And perhaps this instability might be part of the problem, but also there is a potential that if we could find, using some of the different illusions, if we could find a way to maybe make sort of update their perceptual experience of the body of someone with eating disorders. And I have hypotheses of how this could be done. Then perhaps we can make they're more accurate, then realize their true shape, and therefore make some progress into helping with therapy. I mean, that would be the ideal, to be able to use some sort of body illusions in therapy in order to kind of update body representations so they're more accurate.
So what do you mean by update exactly?
Yeah, I was thinking that. As I was saying that, I was thinking, what does that mean? Okay, so, well, if you think of the traditional view of someone with anorexia, for example, and there's lots of pictures you might see in the media where they look in a mirror, but instead of seeing their true emaciated self, they see a fat or a normal sized body. Now, exactly whether this is how they experience it, probably some do, but maybe not all do. But this might be a feature, or something similar to this be a feature of some presentations of eating disorders. Exactly, we need to learn a little bit about why it's not accurate, why their representation of the self isn't accurate. But it could be, if you are able to use these illusions to change their experience of themselves, even by giving them a different size body and making them realize that actually, when they look back at themselves, perhaps afterwards or during the illusion, that hang on, that myself, my own body is too skinny rather than this fat body that I've been looking at. I mean, one some examples in the literature have been just anecdotal, actually, where people will see a reflection of a body in a window or a mirror, and they'll be like, oh God, she's skinny, until they realize it's themselves, and then they don't recognize that, if that makes sense. So perhaps if we can change the way that they view the body, so like either they see their own body as if it's someone else, and that kind of can make that connection, somehow update that body representation, or use these illusions to just change their perceptual experience, that might just kind of make a shift in the brain so they're more accurately recognize the true size of their own body. I'm not saying that all people with eating disorders have this inaccurate representation of body size, but maybe for the ones that do have this, that might help to in some way through therapy.
I mean, in a way that is kind of, that might be a goal in itself, right? Finding out who do have that feature and who don't.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. We need to learn about. That's why the mechanisms are so important, right? So we need to learn about what's, who has this, or how many people kind of have this. Is it a true perceptual deficit? And we need to do a lot of this basic science before we can get to the clinical, more applied stuff. And so I guess that's why it's kind of difficult going to a lot of clinicians when you're not immediately going to like, oh, let's try this, it will help as a therapy. But I guess that's an importance of doing a lot of the work looking at the variation within the healthy community, because unfortunately, you have plenty of people who aren't diagnosed with eating disorders who are very dissatisfied with their bodies, or have relatively high or sort of risk factors, or similar sort of, not quite clinical, but high negative feelings towards their body, and or bad relationships with food, that perhaps we can use this population first to show some patterns, and then move on to the clinic, which is kind of what I've been trying to do for the last number of years. But yeah, so did that make any sense?
One thing that's interesting to me, so it seemed to me, I mean, you said earlier, for example, that the part of the reason why illusions may or may not work with certain people is because of maybe some top-down processes that you go like, well, I know it's not my hand or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then you also mentioned that, I mean, anecdotally, but that people with eating disorders might look at their own body, not know it's their own, mm-hmm. and then realize it. So that seems to be, again, like a kind of top-down thing, right? When as soon as they know, like, oh, that is my body, then the perception of that body changes completely. I mean, those stuff, I mean, that's a kind of more generic, I mean, it's not specific to body illusion. So is that like maybe an approach that would be best suited to study first in, stuff that doesn't induce these kind of body illusions? So some sort of, testing how much they weigh prior evidence or whatever, something like that.
Yeah. Well, yes. I think there's been. I think there are some studies with people with eating disorders in this kind of area. But it's I can't remember. I don't know if they've looked exactly at that question, but there's definitely a number of different sort of traits in terms of how they take on information, which is supposedly different in those with eating disorders compared with people without eating disorders. But yeah, but I guess the thing is it's not exactly clear how significant a role, because although I've said obviously it is important, these top-down constraints on body representations, but we can still make people have invisible stretched fingers, which obviously they know is not real. So we can still have this effect. And all the sort of evidence on body representations in those with eating disorders might suggest that they might even get this more strongly. And actually, this paper that I'm currently writing, where we did this monkey hand illusion. So we also did we got adults and children to have the illusion over small or large hands, because previous studies have shown that adults don't really have the same strength illusion when the hand is really small, again for this kind of top-down constraint sort of hypothesis. So we did this study where we took two measures. So we asked people, does it feel like your hand? And we found that same difference between children and adults, that children would own either hand, like big hands or small hands, whereas adults had much lesser ownership over the smaller hand compared to the larger hand. But when we did a different measure, so we just asked them, we showed them a series of different size holes, and we were asking them to make judgments of whether they could fit their hand through, we found that both children and adults showed an effect of the illusion on that sort of, it's not quite an implicit task, but a less direct task. So where they might be saying, oh no, that's not my hand, but when they went to use that hand or make judgments, indirectly assessing the size of the hand, it seemed that they had embodied it to some degree. So
so the adults had, not the children hadn't?
No.
Or
everyone showed that effect.
Everyone showed it, yeah, exactly.
Everyone showed the effect. So whereas the adults then were not showing the illusion over the small hand, but when you asked them to reach through something, after they owned a small hand, they were saying they could fit the hand through smaller sizes of hole. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So it suggests that even though perhaps in a subjective, I'm not getting the illusion kind of way, that has an effect, that maybe when you take other measures, it does have an effect. And I guess we need to look at these in the different populations to see whether if those with eating disorders do the same kind of thing. So even if, I don't know, we don't really know enough about the role of that to really be definitively say if they weigh different types of information differently, they won't get the illusion. There is a hypothesis, and maybe someone should study that, but there are so many. I don't have time to do to answer every question that I find interesting. I'm probably spreading myself a bit thin across different topics as it is. So, but yeah, definitely it could be an interesting question.
By the way, what kind of monkey hand did you use?
It was
I'm asking because I once met someone, and her hands looked exactly like the hands of a gorilla. Like the in terms of like length of, because I think if I remember correctly, gorillas have really short thumbs or something and really large palms. And so then I looked up like different, not monkeys, but apes' hands. Yeah. And for example, I think orangutans have hands that are very similar to humans.
Yeah.
But others don't. So I'm just curious, like how different is it from a human hand?
Yeah, well, it wasn't maybe anatomically correct for the type of monkey it was. I think it was meant to be a chimp's hand, but it was basically it was a bit like a glove to fit a human hand, but it was really hairy and had like the knuckles and features of a monkey hand. It was kind of a bit of a fun thing for the kids to do as well. But we did find interesting effects, as the children would report equivalent illusions, whereas the adults had a less illusion for the monkey hand. So, but yeah, it was I have to admit it wasn't completely anatomically correct, but
okay, it was more okay. So okay,
yeah.
I guess that's why you called it monkey hand and not the bonobo hand.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, no monkeys were harmed in these experiments. I didn't cut off any monkeys'
That's very
hands. Good. So
we should also say rubber hand illusions are also not cut off of people.
Yeah, exactly.
No humans are harmed in that either.
No.
As far as I know, I don't know where you got them from.
Yeah,
that's what you always told me.
Definitely not severed human hands. Although they probably would work.
Although
it would probably work with a severed human hand as well, but I'm not going to do
hypothetically.
That. I think ethics might be a bit of an issue with that,
Yeah, maybe even more than with the eating disorders.
Yeah, people. Exactly. How are you going to get this? Okay.
Well, we have ways.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so back to I'm curious about the pregnancy stuff. So I don't know exactly what you did, but I could imagine, for example, they're showing a body that's growing larger on the belly would, for example, not be associated with negative feelings because it's seen as a positive sign of the child growing, right?
Well, yeah. Again, it's
or not.
So we didn't. I haven't done that. I haven't done that study yet, but obviously that is one of the things when I was doing the obese with a healthy population, when I gave them this obese body and I saw the effect on body satisfaction. So one of my participants there said to me, actually I felt better when I had the fatter body because it reminded me when I was pregnant and I was so happy at that time. And at the time I hadn't had kids. I'm like, whatever, how can you be happy about that? And then so I think that it's a bit more complex. It's a bit more complicated than that. But so our one published study on this is actually just developing a scale to try and look at this. So it was a bit of a tangent from my normal experimental side, but we wanted to use a good scale in order to test, in order to look at these changes and how people felt about their body. So we had to start there. And I think what's interesting is that obviously for some people in pregnancy, as you're right, just the belly growing is a good thing because it's associated with a healthy baby. But obviously you're still when you're getting bigger, it's still a deviation from the social ideal of what a woman is an attractive woman looks like. And
doesn't that change with, like you go like, well, you're pregnant, so therefore
yeah,
stuff,
well,
or not?
Yes and no, not for everyone.
Okay.
So I think there's strong cultural aspects in this, but also big individual differences, and also even that it is, even though if it does change during pregnancy. So so there's definitely there's a lot of qualitative studies in this area. And some of them have talked about this change where, I'm allowed to eat what I want. I can have a big belly because I'm pregnant. And so that suspends everything during pregnancy. Whereas other people still really struggle. They're getting bigger and they really struggle with that during pregnancy. So I think there is individual differences in how you adapt to the changing body during pregnancy. But also, even if you're happy to have this baby bump, it's like that isn't the only physical change that you have during pregnancy, right? So that not everyone just puts weight on just where their bump is, but there's lots of to be honest, there's not one part of your body that probably doesn't get affected by pregnancy, which a lot of people aren't expecting. And so they struggle with that, and so there's still an ideal pregnant body. It just probably has this perfect little baby bump and slim everywhere else, right? So it's not just the case of you can look how you like because you're pregnant and you're growing this person, which it should be because your body is doing this. It's an amazing thing, and it takes a lot of energy to grow a child. It's crazy. But it isn't like that, unfortunately. So it's interesting for us to kind of explore that. And I guess what's important is to maybe identify perhaps women who struggle a bit more with the physical changes in pregnancy for whatever reason, whether it's because they're having more hard time with physical changes, or because of their beliefs beforehand, which mean that they don't accept them very well or as easily. These people might be more at risk at developing postnatal depression, or prenatal depression or anxiety, that kind of thing. And also you have to think that although there's this sort of, when you're pregnant, then there might be some forgiveness as well. You're getting a big belly. As soon as you give birth, what happens then? And I think that's where a lot of people have, obviously, this, that the focus shifts away from, the pregnant woman needs to be looked after because she's got the baby, she's allowed to kind of eat what she wants and look how she wants. You give birth, suddenly the focus is all on the baby, not on the mother, incorrectly so. And then you're not, where's your excuse for having a big belly anymore? Obviously you still have an excuse, but you know, not that you need an excuse, but you know what I mean. It's like internally, I think there's a lot of problems, and just physically, like if you've had a long traumatic birth as well, you're not just overweight, but all the physical elements can take you months or years. Some people have bodily changes which never go away, so it's a huge physical undertaking just to create a human being, and so there's a lot to explore there. So yes, I think that it would be interesting to look at the overall changes, as you've suggested, to see whether they actually get a more positive feeling owning bigger bellies. But more importantly, I think it's to look at the individual differences for those, to maybe identify people who are maybe at more risk at developing mental health issues, and perhaps we can pick that up from their experience of their body or their physical changes during pregnancy, or at least part of that. I'm not saying it's the only cause, but perhaps it can contribute in some way. And so that's what I'm interested in, rather than the overall effect, but more nuanced changes which might be tell us something about, help us with maternal and infant health and well-being, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean,
so I feel like I've just sort of, preached at you about how difficult it is for a woman to give birth and be pregnant and stuff. But you have, obviously, how would you know? You have no idea. But it's
that's true.
And I had no idea before it happened to me, and that's why I'm really interested in this field now. So I think it's quite interesting.
Did that then kind of shift your also academic interest a bit in that sense?
Yeah.
Or was it more kind of realizing that there was just something like, it can be applied to that and it fits well?
Yes, a bit of both. So, I think right now I'm really interested in, the pregnancy side of things. And I think it has academically shifted my interests a bit. It's still within the same broad umbrella. And I have PhD students who are just a PhD student, and also other students who all want to work with the eating disorder stuff. And perhaps if you're a 21-year-old, you're not so interested in pregnancy research. I mean, some are, but not everyone is. So I'm definitely still doing that. So it's not completely shifted my academic interest, but it certainly has made a bit of a change. And just applying things that that we know about or we've learned about, just generally body perception and stuff like that in non-pregnant women, it's made me think about how that might change during pregnancy. So one quite hot topic in body representation research at the moment is interoception. So interoception is sort of body signals that come from inside the body. So things like hunger, thirst, potentially pain, and stuff like that come from.
Does proprioception count as?
Yeah, so it is quite difficult, the boundaries of what counts as interoception and what doesn't. But so some people might argue proprioception does. Another thing is affective touch. So if you obviously this is when you touch someone, that's very external. But if you touch them at the right velocity, then that activates something called C fibers, under the skin, and it feels pleasant. So this nice feeling touch, opposed to if you stroke fast, which doesn't have the same internal effects. And so this is, we've done a bit of work with effective touch, and some people would definitely say it's interoception, other people say not so sure. So there is a bit of a debate of exactly what counts as interoception or not. But so in terms of pregnancy, obviously there's huge changes. So, or at least there's big changes, certainly in the way that you might attend to these internal signals. So, for me, for example, I've always been someone who just, maybe I don't have very good interoceptive awareness, but I don't always notice when I'm hungry. So I can be like at work and be like, oh, it's 4 o'clock and I haven't had lunch. How did that happen? When I became pregnant, that did not happen. I was eating lunch at 11 and I was starving. I got to points where I remember being like, I have to eat now, otherwise I'm going to faint. And I also know other people who've been like that. And, my husband is like that. And obviously he's never had kids himself.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Yeah. And so I think that's quite interesting that, or at least my attention to these signals might have changed. So it's probably I got more hungry because my body is more busy using stuff up, but also because I'm aware that I'm growing a person inside me. I was like, oh, I better act on that rather than, oh, it's just me, it's fine. So it might change the way that you attend to it, but also there are significant changes in, suddenly you have these little baby kicks from within you. And so they're sort of an internal bodily signal, which is weird because it's not actually you that's making that signal, it's a little baby kicking. So there's like is
that interoception?
Well, yeah, it's I don't know, it's like but then I guess it's the baby is making the kicks, but you're feeling it from within your own body, right? You're feeling it because they're kicking into your bladder, or you're elbowing you in the ribs or something like that. So exactly, it's a bit more complicated than that, yeah, but there are definitely signals coming from within the body which are brand new. And so I think that all of this is so annoyingly, it's with the lack of face-to-face testing at the moment, it's quite difficult to pursue this at the minute. I have been dabbling with online experiments, but they're harder, obviously they're not so easy to control and stuff like that. But it's just trying to explore a little bit about how these interoceptive changes might relate again to sort of maternal mental health, because in terms of eating disorders, like poor interoceptive awareness has been linked with eating disorders, and that kind of makes sense intuitively, that perhaps someone with anorexia either doesn't recognize that they're hungry or ignores that they're hungry, so they have to dampen down these signals in some way. So it kind of makes sense that this there is some difference in interoception with these. And again, maybe someone with binge eating disorder misinterpreting signals, thinking that they're hungry when they're not, that kind of thing. So it does make sense. So I'm kind of interested. I guess the benefit of working with pregnant samples is they're a little bit easier to work with than your eating disorder samples, but you can tackle some of the same questions, and maybe something about what we learn in pregnancy we can then apply to other clinical groups. So that's kind of what I'm interested in. So they're kind of the same questions, similar questions, but in different populations, and but it's kind of part of the same sort of thing.
Yeah, it does sound as if you could do, as you said, many of the studies, or address many of the topics that you want to do, but without, for example, the ethical, I would imagine, at least fewer ethical constraints, because they're not a clinical group.
Yeah, exactly. They're healthy women. They just happen to be pregnant. Exactly. Yeah. So it does make it a bit easier. And then maybe if we can do some of the work in pregnancy and we learn about some of they're a really good group, because there are significant changes that probably occur during this time. If we learn a bit about that, then maybe we can build more of the knowledge that we need in order to kind of convince clinicians working with eating disorders to let me at their patients. So that sounded wrong, but you know what I mean. So,
I think I know what you mean.
Yeah. So, but you learn, but they're interesting in their own way as well, as I said, because the women in pregnancy and just after pregnancy are much more prone than the general population for having depression and anxiety. So obviously there's a lot more going on, but because I'm a body researcher, then I'm interested in the body's contribution to these, if it has a contribution to these things, which, because pregnancy is such a physical and birth is so physical, you would think that it would have some sort of potential contribution to what's going on.
And it's kind of just, so have you, I mean, it sounds to me that this is still early days, but have you looked at like how this changes over time? Like from, you know, let's say you have people who, I mean, if it's with like a fertility clinic or something, you would have people who aren't pregnant yet but want to be, and then you could kind of look at how that, is that something you want to do? Or
yeah, absolutely. So it would be, I mean, that obviously if you work with people with the fertility clinic, it might be people who are trying to conceive might be paying different attention to their body compared to people who are before they're even trying to conceive, and then that's going to be difficult to get. That's a much more long project to try and get people before they've even thought about having kids and follow them the whole way. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the first next step would be to try to follow people from pregnancy to postnatally. So we've done a bit of work in pregnancy. So as I said, we've got one published study, and we've got other ones, lots of other data from pregnant women. And we've got some data from postnatal women, but they're different women. But the next step would be to try and follow people through pregnancy and to postnatally, and to see what happens. But then, yes, of course, it would be interesting to find people not pregnant and then follow them all the way through. So yeah, that's a goal, but it's a bit. I need some funding to be able to do that. So some of the data that I've got at the moment hopefully will provide good pilot data for grant applications. So that's what I'm hoping.
But it does sound to me like you have like a, it seems to me like it's kind of a niche in the sense that it's potentially very interesting research that hasn't been done yet.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of the work.
Do you know maybe like or not more like an area that hasn't been looked into yet almost?
Absolutely. Well, yeah. So there's some work on body satisfaction in pregnancy and that kind of thing, but certainly pulling together perception and this emotional, and also even the body satisfaction in pregnancy is a very relatively niche field in itself, and you know, there's a lot of qualitative studies and not much strong experimental studies. Mm-hmm. So that's where we're hoping to sort of fill that gap. So and you know, it's quite an interesting bringing together different areas, and I think it's quite interesting. And as I said, I've recently been I found a midwife, a trained midwife who's really keen on research, and so I'm hoping that we can build a good relationship to try and pursue this area more, because I think it's really interesting, and as you said, it's an under researched area. I mean, especially when you think of how many women get pregnant, you know, and also there's a really quite high proportion relatively of women who then develop mental health issues over this period, and the knock-on effects of that aren't just damaging necessarily to the mother, but also to the baby's development. So it's actually a really important field relative to its general lack of research in that area compared to other areas. So I think it's important. I'm probably becoming more feminist in my time as well, just in terms of interested in, you know, in terms of, like, I guess, women in science, and when you look at many of these journals which are tailored towards things like midwifery or women's health, the impact factors are really low compared to some of others, and you just think, anyway, I won't preach to you about that. But this is how
that was actually one thought I did have at some point when I think when you mentioned funding. So like, this might be the kind of area where it's harder to get funding because of these kind of factors. Yeah,
well, I think one of the problems that one of my main aims in research is to try and link the clinic with the lab, right? But that's probably one of the things which makes it more hard for funding, if that makes sense. So I think I mentioned it before that there's probably some slightly different emphasis depending if you're clinical applied research compared to more basic science research. And because my research often seems to kind of fall in between the two, so some research funders will be like, oh, that's too applied for us, whereas the applied funders will be like, oh, that's too basic science for us. So I need to. It's a bit of a learning curve for me to work out how to pitch, and so perhaps if I'm applying to a more applied funder, I have to kind of lean towards that in the main aims, but then obviously try to do all the basic science part as part of the studies, but perhaps less focus on them in the application. Talking about bureaucracy, of that element now. So, but it is, yeah, I think that is a challenge in that way. But hopefully, hopefully it won't be too hard, I'm hoping. So now I'm back from maternity leave, I'm up to grant writing. I'm starting to be working on grants again, so I'm hoping that it won't be that bad. I mean, obviously applying for funding is hard anyway, but it's a bit of a lottery anyway. But
then again, it's also novel, so
yeah, I'm hoping so. I'm hoping that will be the nice selling factor. So, but we will see. Time will tell.
Actually, one thing I wanted to ask was, you said online studies. I'm just curious, how do you do? I'm assuming you're not doing body illusions online.
No.
So what kind of stuff can you do online for your line of research?
Yeah, well, I've just done one pilot, and I've just got pilot data for it, so I'm not sure when you're going to broadcast this. Don't want everyone copying me, but no. No, I mean there's a task. What's the acronym stand for? Yes, basically there's a task called MIST, which is I can't remember what it's actually, some mindful interest. It's about interoceptive awareness, right? And it's a bit of a weird task, and probably one that I wouldn't have jumped to use first if it wasn't one that I thought, hang on, this might be something that I can apply to an online study. So it's where you basically have people. You ask people to attend to different parts of their body for a couple of minutes, and then during that time you're sort of, mindfulness. I don't know if you've ever done yoga or mindfulness, and they're like, now put your attention to your back, and then and then you think about your back, and you're meant to be sort of in the zone. And then what happens in this time is there's some like little 3 beeps or whatever, and when you hear the beep, if your mind has wandered, if you've started thinking about a cup of tea or something like that, then you have to respond. Whereas if you are still concentrating, then you don't press a button, right? And then, but I've also had to adapt it a little bit for a slightly different measure too, just to find out how easy they find it to maintain their attention towards different parts of the body. And so this is meant to be some sort of interception, avoidance or something, or lack of avoidance of attending to different parts of the body, right? So this is the task that I've tried, I've adapted to online, and actually I've got some really interesting, it seems to have worked. So I haven't got a massive sample because it's only a pilot study to see if it's even feasible, but it's so I got people to also take a questionnaire which is meant to tap into interoception, and what I found is that their performance on the task does correlate with some of the scales associated with interoception. So it does seem to be tapping into at least some aspects of interoception, or what we think of as interoception, but in a less direct way, in terms of asking you how much do you attend to whatever. I mean, it sort of does, I suppose, but anyway, it's a different measure to do it. And so I've tried this, and I've got some pilot data from around 20 pregnant women, and some postnatal women, and some neither women. I'm just, there's some potentially interesting findings, because I'm looking at things like, I don't know, weight gain during pregnancy, and we're finding some potentially quite interesting relationships between the performance on the task, which need further exploration, because obviously my plan would be to get them in the lab. It's not so controlled, but they potentially point to something that could be interesting. So that's trying to make something in the current situation to work, and it's been more successful than I thought. As I say, only quite a small sample, but it's been more. I've definitely got some interesting pilot data, which it deserves further exploration in there. So I find that interesting. But it's quite tricky. It's quite tricky at the moment.
That also sounds like the kind of thing that you could do with people with eating disorder, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So, and probably a little bit more accepted, because it sounds a bit like a mindfulness thing, and there's plenty of studies which have done mindfulness in eating disorders. There's definitely something that we could probably do with that kind of population. But it's only my first time of toying with it. Toying with the paradigm, and so we might plan some more studies. I think maybe a student project potentially could be next year, just looking at just further seeing whether this works, and it would probably have to be online as well, so we're not really sure, given the current situation, where we're going to be and when we're going to be allowed to do face-to-face testing.
So you're not allowed to do any face-to-face testing?
Not at the moment. I'm not even at the moment. I can't even go into the department. So and we don't even have a timeline for when we will be doing face-to-face testing. So we don't know when that's going to happen. And also, even when we do, I guess the problem is, if I want to be testing patients, they might be protected even still, right? Especially if you think about eating disorder patients, which might be in a vulnerable category because they might be physically vulnerable anyway. So testing these people might be quite a long way in the future directly, and even pregnant women. So a lot of the research might be that it might not be harmful, but the advice is be cautious. So unfortunately, that's a big barrier at the moment. So just trying to think of ways to try and get around that. And I don't want to just do loads of questionnaire type studies. That's not really what I don't mind dabbling in it, but as a means to an end. But that's not really my research focus. I want to do experiments. So I'm trying to explore avenues. But yeah, so you're allowed in the office, I can see.
Yeah. Yes, this is not my private house. My ceilings aren't quite that high in my flat. We'll see for how much longer. Seems like so in Germany it was beginning of April was the peak, and since then it's gone really far down. I think they've been so here. I think the first thing was so we're at a hospital, which changes things slightly.
Okay.
But I think we've been scanning since fMRI since May or so.
Okay.
I mean, not me, but like people in the institute. So yeah, it is like we're doing behavioral testing and everything. It's more or less back to normal here.
Okay.
But then again, the numbers are creeping up again. So we'll see where we'll be in a month or two.
Yes. So we were opening up, but then the numbers are creeping up. So things are put on freeze, and I mean, there's still plans for the university to open for the autumn term, but whether as I say, there's no plans for face-to-face testing yet, so I don't know when anything will be happening. But all teaching next year will be online. Well, all lectures will be online. There might be some student presentations, but like a group of 30 in like a massive lecture hall, rather than so ways to get around it that way. But yeah, so all student projects are all planned to be online at the moment. My main research is writing up papers which have piled up since I've been on maternity leave. So obviously I've got a lot of catching up to do anyway. And online testing when we can, and systematic reviews, that kind of thing. So,
yeah, everyone's going to be doing their reviews.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually reading literature of other people.
Yeah, that's good.
Sorry, I have this fly that's here. It's really annoying. Yeah, I mean, in some sense, that it seems to me almost like it seems to me most academics do have a lot of projects that they kind of should be writing up right now, or should have done a while ago. So I feel like people might just kind of get rid of their backlog.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah.
At least temporarily, until then, in a few years, a new one builds up. But
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm hoping that, making use of the time to write up these papers and to and hopefully to write some grants. So
Well, yeah,
that's the plan. So hopefully it won't.
So how does, or in general, I guess maybe like since we like saw each other the last time, I think you moved to York, right?
Yeah.
We saw each other in Stockholm the last time. But how's it been as a lecturer?
Well,
how's that been?
Yeah.
Starting your own lab and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's been good. So I like the autonomy. It's nice to have that, to be able to direct. I mean, Henrik was incredibly good at letting you kind of direct your own research anyway, but it was quite nice to have for it to be me and not just Henrik's postdoc, so that's quite nice. Obviously a lot of work trying to build your lab up, and also just because I'm a lot busier with other stuff. I have to teach, I have to do administration for the departments, so I'm not doing as much of the face-to-face testing, so having to delegate that has been quite, it's learning how to do that, which is good. I mean, it's helpful. I've had two fantastic PhD students. One of them finished in April, and he was amazing, and definitely could trust him to do everything perfectly in the lab. Well, really well in the lab, and like he was amazing and did a really good job. My current PhD student, she's also fantastic. So I've been really lucky with these brilliant PhD students, which has helped. So that's all been really good, and I really enjoy mentoring. I mean, I still need mentoring myself, but I enjoy mentoring other people, because I think I've learned quite a lot about how to play the game of academia. Many of the lessons I've learned too late for myself, but I'm hoping to help bring on new researchers, the next generation of researchers. So I really enjoy that aspect. And it's really nice when you meet enthusiastic students who are really intelligent and really, I find that really inspiring, and I really enjoy that element of things. So I really like that. Obviously I'm driven by research, so the other tasks feel like they might get in the way sometimes, but they're part of my job. It's nice to have a permanent position, I suppose, and so you can actually, because when you move institutions, there's always this backlog of settling in somewhere and building up your research again. So it's kind of nice to, I've had that. Obviously, then I decided to have 2 kids, which sort of does the same, gives you a little gaps in your CV anyway. But it's nice to be able to know that I'm not be searching for the next job, which is kind of good. So, and I'm lucky where I am, because I think that my teaching load isn't very high, which is good. And I teach a module on my own subject area, which is good. It's just that I actually find I get a bit stressed about that, because I want people to enjoy it, because it's my baby, right? And I have to tell them about my research. It's like, please love the research. Please love this area.
Great, right?
Yeah, this is great. It is great. You've got to find it.
You're
great.
Having fun.
Yeah, and it's generally gone very well. But yeah, I do get that anxiety of like, this is important to me, so I'm hoping that you enjoy it. But yeah, so yeah, it's been good. It's been good. Some of it, obviously you kind of miss postdoc days and PhD where you don't have to do these extra tasks, but then it's nice to be part of a community at York where it's supportive. So when I'm doing this administration, it's often helping my colleagues, or that kind of thing, and helping the department as a whole, which is nice. And I think that at York there's definitely that feeling of this camaraderie in the department. There's a lot less politics than perhaps there might be in other places, and it's a really nice team, and we get on really well, and so you feel less. Well, personally, I don't mind doing some of the tasks so much, because it's to contribute to the group, and if I don't do it, then one of my friends is going to have to do it. So it makes you want to take part in these aspects, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's been good. I just don't like the title lecturer, because if you're outside of the UK, and even if you're inside of the UK and you don't know much, you don't know about the role of an academic, then people just think you teach, and it's like, well, no, I don't just teach. It's the research element. So that's the only the title is a bit annoying.
I guess that's a matter of time, right?
Yeah, so a lot of institutions in the UK are changing to that assistant professor, associate professor kind of titles. But
well, I mean, also in terms of you.
Oh yeah.
At some
well,
point,
when I
not being a lecturer.
Oh yeah, well yeah, but then it's senior lecturer, and then it's reader or professor. So
yeah, reader sounds even weirder.
It is, isn't it? Well,
like, you read.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have to wait until I'm a professor. So I don't know whether. Yeah. Anyway, but not every academic becomes a professor, so we will see. But yeah.
But one thing I always wondered with teaching, I mean, I've obviously never done any, but it always seemed to me that it would be better to do an optional or elective module.
Yeah.
Rather than one where like everyone has to do it, because like developmental psychology is part of the curriculum. I would imagine that yours would be optional, right?
Yes. So I've taught both, and I think that there was certainly some of the people in our department who teach these core modules do it in a way where they really engage students. But yeah, but to do my module, then people have chosen to do it, and normally I've got lots of students. It's quite a popular module because it's sort of linking a bit to clinical stuff, which I think a lot of students.
So what exactly
it's called body.
What's the title?
It's called body representation. So I talk about body illusions. So I have lectures on that, and then I have we look at different aspects. So I look at eating disorders, I look at the body in pain, I look at kind of action awareness, and different stroke conditions where, like anosognosia for hemiplegia, I don't know if you've heard of that one, where people are disabled following stroke. Yes. And unaware of their disability. So
right, yeah.
So that kind of thing. So I try to make it nice and clinical related, which is obviously it meets my interest, but also a lot of the students like that kind of thing too. So yeah.
I was about to say that those are the kind of like Oliver Sacks kind of things that are just very easy to understand and very counterintuitive or confusing. So like kind of very interesting in that way.
Absolutely.
Kind of.
Yes.
What was the what's it called again?
Anosognosia for hemiplegia.
So hemiplegia is when you can't see half your vision?
No, that's hemianopia. But hemiplegia is paralysis on one side of the body. So it's someone, typically right hemisphere stroke, they are paralyzed down the left side of their body, but they are unaware of their paralysis. So they might just deny that they're paralyzed. So I've got papers where I tested these patients before, and I've had people saying, yeah, I can ride a bike still. And I'm like, oh, when I spoke to him, I was a bit like, I asked him why he was in hospital. And he said, oh, because my wife isn't well. And it's like, okay, actually, it's because you're disabled. And he didn't recognize that element, that he was disabled. But you can also... Was
his wife actually in hospital?
No.
Was that also completely made up?
That wasn't true, yeah, exactly. But then you also get patients who... It's a complicated condition with many different presentations. But you also get patients who might admit that they have a disability, but then try and get out of bed, try and do stuff as if they don't have a disability. And then, so there's lots of... It's often quite short term following a severe right hemisphere stroke, but some people can have it for a long duration, and obviously it can be inhibitory for rehabilitation. If you don't think you're ill, why would you take part in the physio or whatever? So and also you can learn a little bit about self-awareness if people aren't, after with such clear evidence that they're paralyzed on one side of their body, such clear evidence that they can't move it, and they're denying it or not aware of it, then I think that's really interesting learning about. And that's why I like these kind of conditions. It fascinated me when I was a student. It's like, I can't imagine being that person and just, what is the subjective experience like of being unaware of your disability? So I think, it's a really fascinating condition. And that lecture particularly is also very popular.
Yeah.
So
can you try rubber hand illusion with that? Or does paralysis mean they can't move, or they also can't feel anything?
So a lot of the patients can't feel anything, but some can. And they have done, there's a researcher at UCL called Katerina Fetopoulou, and she's done, and she worked, I think, together with Paul Jenkinson. I collaborate with both of them. They're lovely and brilliant researchers, and they've done some sort of rubber hand style experiments with these patients. And what they find, if I remember rightly, is that just placing a hand in front of them, often they just think it's their hand, right? So they readily accept it's their hand. So so you can definitely do some work with those, but they're quite rare and difficult to work with patients. So, because as I said, it's often after quite a severe stroke. I mean, I as part of my PhD, I did work with neglect patients. So these are people who have a lack of awareness of one side of space. So, and again, they were sort of similar right hemisphere brain damage, similar to the anosognosia, except anosognosia is more rare. But they're often really sick. So I remember sort of like learning about a patient, going in to see him and he'd passed away, that kind of thing. So you're talking about people testing at the bedside often. But it was when I was looking for neglect patients that I happened to just come across a file of a guy, and I looked at his medical notes and I was like, oh, anosognosia. And so then we did some experiments with him, and it was really fascinating. But yeah, they're difficult to come across and test, but yeah, they're a really fascinating condition, and some sort of work has been done with those with kind of rubber hands. But yeah, so that's it's a popular module, a popular lecture. So that and the eating disorders, they're interesting. They love eating disorders.
People love the eating disorders.
They're fascinated by eating disorders because it's I guess a lot of our students know someone who has had an eating disorder or something like that, so there's that personal connection. So I think there's that interest, which is, but the research is hard to do on all these populations because so
I'm curious about one thing you said earlier when you said you still need mentoring. So I'm curious, how does that happen if it's so for people like me, PhD students, postdocs, it's very, I should say, it's built into the system that you have mentoring, right?
Yeah.
How do you go about that if you don't, if officially in that sense you don't have someone whose lab you're working in and who looks over your shoulder as part of their job in that sense?
Yeah, so I think the departments are getting better at this, and our department is really good. I mean, I did when I started my lectureship. Actually, I got given two mentors. I got a teaching mentor and a research mentor, and they were both fantastic. Actually, they're both great, and so they're people that I meant to go to and speak to about advice for these things.
So is that normal? I'd never heard of this.
Well, I don't know. I think it's probably, as I said, I think it's a developing thing. So hopefully it's going to be more normal. There's also things like the early career. So we have, ECR, the Early Career Research Forum. I think that we have, it's mostly for postdocs, but new sort of lecturers are also included in this. So they put on events and different sort of training and stuff for the facilities and social networks for these members, which is good. But yeah, otherwise you're just kind of having a good relationship with just your work colleagues is really useful. So as I said, there's a really good atmosphere at York. It's really nice. Everyone's keen to help each other. So there's initiatives to help. So we have obviously more experienced professors and stuff who have worked on done loads of grants and also been on boards for grants, for grant funding bodies. And so there are people that you can go to talk to about the best options and can help guide you through the process. So so it might not be, I guess it really would depend, rather than for a PhD student who presumably should always have their PhD supervisor and probably a supervisory team, so you might have 2 supervisors, right, perhaps. And actually at York we have something called a thesis advisory panel, so you get other faculty members come in and your PhD students regularly present to them, and so there's more people outside your supervision team. There's more people that you can turn to, which is really useful, and get feedback from slightly different areas, which is again really good. So I think it's really dependent, on maybe where you work, but and even where I think it's really good at York, but it's getting more formalized. So they're sort of, it was more informal, and now they're sort of writing these roles into people's sort of workloads. So one of the problems that I had when you're trying to get feedback from grants is like, I don't want to, they're obviously really busy, I don't want to bother them. But now it's part of their job description that they have to help you out with your grant proposal. So I'm hoping that that should be good for the future. I think it's a great system. But I think even professors, you can take advice, you can learn from other researchers, and I think and recognizing that is hopefully a good thing. So I'm still learning. I'm learning new methods all the time, and things like that. Working with in R to get beautiful graphs, whereas I probably spent all my training building them painstakingly in Excel, and so it's sort of, you can perhaps learn from people who are younger than you, can help you sort of, or at least academically younger than you, can help you engage in these kind of new technology and stuff. So there's definitely learning needs to continue throughout your career, and mentoring. I don't have all the answers, and
not all of them.
Lots of them. No, not really. But
right.
So I think it's really important. But I'm really fortunate to work at a very good department, which helps with that. But I'm hoping it's generally across academia. I think that there's more is being put in place to provide that kind of mentorship throughout your career, and not just when you're a student. So.
It sounds really cool. I mean, I just, I mean, it would make sense that you would have this kind of, especially like in your case when you come new to the department, right? It's not like you know everyone and everything there.
Absolutely.
I think in that kind of sense, it's probably also good to just have someone who helps you out in a kind of formal way.
Yeah, exactly. Someone that you feel like you can just go knock on their door and like, can we go for a coffee? So, and my 2 mentors are very good friends now. So one of them's left York, but we still work together, and she's a really good friend, and the other one is a professor in the department, and he's so lovely. So they're really good. So that's how that works. But
cool. Do we still have like 10-15 minutes, or cool. I was curious, so how do you decide what to kind of learn yourself and what maybe your students would learn? So let's say something like making nice figures in R. I mean, obviously you can do more than just figures in R, but do you know what I'm trying to get at? Like sometimes it's like, is it really worth the time for you to learn all this stuff if someone in the lab can already do it, for example? Or do you think you should kind of more or less be able to do most of those things that you ask your PhD students to be able to do, or?
Yeah, so right now, I would like to do. I'm, trying to be able to do everything that I ask my PhD students to do. We might learn at the same time. So obviously, I know you can do more in R, and it was revolution. And I can do more in R, and it was revolutionary to be like like doing power analyses, right? And I'm not a big fan of power analyses because of estimated effect sizes are often just plucked out of air. But anyway, I hadn't, and I'd using some different software for that, which I always found a bit like clumsy and not very great. And I was like, oh, I'll just look up how to do it in R and I'll learn how to do that. And it took me about 10 minutes to learn how to do that. And I was like, this is great. This is so much easier. Why didn't I do it like this to start with? So, so absolutely. But the other thing is I've been doing a bit of structural equation modeling. So I've said that I've dabbled a bit in this kind of questionnaire stuff, but obviously we want to do really robust analysis. And learning how to do that in R. So one of my PhD students, we did it in a different software, but we couldn't do all the analysis we wanted to. So she's learning it in R, and I'm trying to learn it in R at the same time. So it's I might not be able to tell her what to do, but I'm hoping that, and if she has struggles, I can help with the guidance through that rather than just purely delegating. Perhaps having a postdoc, like if you had a postdoc that's really good at a particular type of analysis and you didn't really have a clue how to do it yourself, when they leave, what are you going to do then? So maybe in many years' time I'll be too busy and you just cannot learn how to do everything. But at the moment I'm at a point where I'm trying to be able to, if I ask something or we decide with the student that we should incorporate some sort of analysis or we should use a different program for something, then I try to be able to do it myself. So I can check, not that I don't trust them, but you can, if they have problems or something, I can check and I can go through it myself and make sure that it's correct. So yes, and also I don't want to asking them to do something which is really difficult, and it's good.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason of the question was also, I guess you can, how should we say, of course it's always nice to check each other's stuff and that kind of stuff, but I also wonder, it's, there is also a benefit to having complementary skills, right?
Yeah.
Where your PhD student really adds something that for whatever reason you couldn't or can't do right now.
Oh yeah.
So then there's there's a bit of a like, should we really be able to, do you want to have perfect overlap between two people, or do you?
I don't think. Yeah, but the complementaries. Yeah, I mean they'll probably end up being better at it than me for a start, because they might hopefully have more time to engage and learn of these things. But also the complementary skills might or come from different ways, like perspectives in where they're coming from for designing experiments, and that's certainly been the case with my PhD students. With one of them, I really my first PhD student, I really watched that grow over time. The way I think it came with confidence as well, where he sort of grew in his ability to sort of make suggestions and come with his own ideas, and that was really lovely to see. And my other student was very came with her own ideas from the beginning, and that was really interesting because it's pushed me in directions that I wouldn't necessarily go, and that's and so we get that anyway. And yeah, I think definitely with some of the analysis that probably some of my students are, I could do it, but I think that they're probably better at it than me. So but yeah, I guess I like certainly with collaborators. I like to work with other academics a lot in science. I like to collaborate. I think that adds value. I just like to be able to talk my ideas with someone, and it's nice to get perspectives from other people, and their complementary skills are really good. So I've worked, when we did all this sort of rubber hand illusion and monkey hand illusion with kids, I worked with a developmental psychologist, so that was really useful. And yeah, so it's nice there I really like to have complementary skills. But I guess with students, I want to be able to support them, and so I feel like I'd feel bad to sort of learn this and I'm not going to be there to offer any sort of support through their learning process. So maybe postdocs it might be slightly different, but definitely with students I don't like to ask them to do things that either I couldn't do or I wouldn't be prepared to learn alongside them to be able to support them through it, because if they get stuck then they should be able to turn to me. Even if I'm also stuck, that might make them feel better, right? It's like, I'm not sure.
So I'm also stuck.
let's find someone else to ask. But it's sort of at least we do it together, and it doesn't make them feel that they're lost on their own.
Yeah. Okay, then maybe as a kind of final question. So let's say someone has been listening to this and thinking, I'd really like to work as a master's student, PhD student, postdoc with you. What kind of people are you looking for, or if you are looking for people, and if so, how can they kind of, for PhDs, I'm assuming there are programs in York that they can apply for?
Yeah, so we have these sort of departmental studentships that come about, which you normally like to start thinking about it at the beginning of the autumn, and their applications are in January, and they do sort of interviews in February. So we have some of those every year, but there are also other avenues to possibly apply for funding, because obviously all these things are really competitive. So so there are other avenues. So I guess if people are interested, they should email me. But kind of people that I have one PhD student who's in her final year, and I have another a PhD student. She's just got some ESRC funding, so she's doing a master's year and then started with me the year after. But what I'm looking for is people who are smart and have interests that are similar to mine. So I guess quite often I get emails with people who just want to do eating disorder research with patients and stuff, whereas I guess I'm probably looking for people who are more sort of broadly interested in body representations and how that can then be applied, because as I've said before, the likelihood within a PhD to definitely, once you've applied for NHS ethics and engaged with clinicians, the likelihood of doing a whole PhD on eating disorders with eating disorder patients is probably quite slim. But I'm just bright, interested students, so I'm kind of I've had some great PhD students so far, so I'm hoping that will long continue. But always happy to work with people who are interested, and they've always got to read your papers. I'm a sucker for someone who's like, I read your paper on this and I found it really useful. You've read my paper. Lovely. I'm a sucker. That gets me every time. I'm like, okay. I've taken on extra undergraduate students, more than my quota this year, because people have gone on. I shouldn't say this. What if more people do it? Because people have gone on and read my papers and got in touch. And
maybe,
okay. I'm a bit of a sucker.
Yeah, now they also don't have to. They'll just say it. They'll know that you'll just be so happy.
Well, yeah, but then maybe I'll test them on it. If too many people do this, and you're like, so what did you think of this thing? And then we'll get them in for a chat in the lab and then see if they've really read it. But but I think it's like most academics. Like if people have read your research and I really understand what instead of just eating disorder research, that's what she does, but actually read your papers and understand what research you do and are interested in that, then I think that most people, most academics can be swayed by that enthusiasm, because that's what I love, that's what I'm interested in. So I meet someone who is interested in it too, then I'll waffle on for them for hours about it and enjoy that, and that's why. Yeah, so that's the key for any PhD. As advice for anyone applying for a PhD, look up your supervisors and read their papers and let them know you've read their papers, and then that's then you're halfway there, really. So obviously you've still got to get the funding, but But
then again, you'll have enormous grants, so.
Well, I hope that
will be easy.
I hope that are predicting the future well, but we will see. So fingers crossed. But yeah.
Okay, cool. I think I've been taking up enough of your time now.
That's all right. It's been nice. I hope